What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Chasing Clarity Health and Fitness podcast. This is your host, Brandon Cruz, and today is going to be a solo episode. So on today's episode, we're going to cover the topic of Thyroid 101, everything you need to know about optimizing thyroid health, function, and hypothyroidism. So just a few weeks ago, I had Dr. Scott Stevenson on the show to discuss thyroid hormone as part of our fat burners and weight loss drug series that I've been putting together. However, I've yet to do a full deep dive on this topic. So seeing as we received such great feedback on the thyroid hormone masterclass, I wanted to do a full Thyroid 101 episode essentially, because there were several topics I did not get to cover and I think are pertinent to this conversation. I also want to say thank you to everyone who provided me with feedback regarding that episode with Scott, as hearing that type of feedback is always a blessing. And let me specifically give a shout out to one of our OG listeners, Morpsey, who's a connoisseur of podcasts to say the least. And he said, and I'm going to read this out because this was a great piece of feedback to say the least. And so he said, God damn, this was one of the best podcasts ever, Brandon. It's funny. I was thinking about and wishing that you would delve deeper into thyroid. And here you went hard into it, plus all the interesting talk and practicals around refeeds. Great stuff, guys. Awesome educators in this industry. So first and foremost, Morpsey, thank you so much for this incredible feedback. And then also for all your support of the show. You always share, you always comment back on in terms of the show, the things you've liked, and also have provided me a ton of topics over the years. So, man, you've been listening to podcasts with me for like 4 or 5 years. So I do appreciate that. So first and foremost, if you have yet to listen to the previous episodes where I've covered different aspects of thyroid physiology, which I won't be covering today, I encourage you to go back to the following episodes. So first and foremost, go back and listen to episode 117, which was the science of fat burners with Dr. Scott Stevenson. And this is where we initially started to tease into the topic of thyroid hormone. But honestly, that podcast was like 2+ hours in and of itself. So I did not get to cover nearly as much as I wanted to. So then we did a follow-up episode, which was episode 120, which was the thyroid hormone masterclass with Dr. Scott Stevenson. And in this podcast, we covered the relationship between energy availability, carbohydrate intake, body composition, refeeds, and thyroid health. As I will not be covering those same topics in today's podcast, I want you guys to go back because I already went through thyroid hormone physiology and the research on the topic with Scott. So on this week's episode is really going to be more of a practical and applied perspective on thyroid from, honestly, my decade plus of coaching clients. So the topic of thyroid hormone, both hormone health and then also function, is one that has become a more frequently discussed subject as of the last few years, especially within the fitness and nutrition spaces. And this is due to the fact that blood work and lab work have become much more prominent. So many who have been experiencing issues with weight loss or their metabolism have become aware that it could be potentially due to a dysregulation in their thyroid hormone health and a potential dysregulation or downregulation in thyroid hormone production. So the thyroid is the main gland that regulates metabolism in the body. So I want you to think about this as the master control system of your metabolic rate. The thyroid gland produces two thyroid hormones, which are T4 and T3, which both play vital roles in our metabolic rate, our energy expenditure levels, and our body weight regulation. It's been shown that the status of our thyroid hormones are highly correlated to our metabolic rate and body weight, which is why it has such an impact on our ability to regulate our body weight, to change and modify our body composition. It has a large impact on our activity levels, pretty much due to the impact that it has on energy levels, and then also has an impact on our basal metabolic rate. So usually when we speak of thyroid issues, we're referring to low thyroid output, which is also referred to as hypothyroidism, which can make it more difficult for individuals to lose weight and can cause a ton of symptoms that result in an individual with impaired thyroid function or hypothyroidism to have poor biofeedback and a lower quality of life. Now, every cell in our body has a receptor for thyroid hormone, and thyroid hormones are involved in the development and maintenance of almost all of our tissues. So seeing as thyroid impacts every cell and tissue in the body, this is a hormone which is important for us to pay attention to. I'll tell you within my own coaching practice, thyroid is one of the main hormones besides sex hormones such as testosterone, estradiol, and progesterone, and then metabolic hormones like insulin that I pay a lot of attention to with my clients and I monitor closely on their lab work. So seeing as I work with very body composition and physique-oriented clients, it's imperative and very important for me to dig into their thyroid values to ensure that they can make the best body composition and metabolic health progress as possible, especially as many people come to me with the goal of achieving their leanest physique to date. Yet, I also tend to work with a lot of individuals who have a long dieting history, they have high stress levels, both of which can impair your thyroid health. So thyroid issues are one of the most common hormonal issues, and bottlenecks I see new clients coming to me with, which is why I've had such an interest in this. It's also something I've struggled with personally. And so this is a topic that hits close to home for me, as I personally have hypothyroidism. So I initially started digging into this topic years ago to fix my own thyroid function and overall hormonal health. And as with all topics that I've dealt with, whether that be metabolic adaptation, from contest prep dieting, or relative energy efficiency, which was something I dealt with in my childhood or early adolescence due to sports. And then also like the body fat overshooting phenomenon, aka the post-diet rebound effect, which I had after I experienced after my first contest prep, where I just rapidly regained weight and body fat. These are all topics that I've learned a ton during the past decade plus about, which has allowed me to help hundreds of clients that are in a similar position, and also to help other people out there. So whether it be listeners, it be clientele, my mentees, other coaches that I mentor, I help them to avoid the mistakes that I've made in the past and learn from the lessons that I have. So on today's episode, I'm going to cover the introduction to the topic of thyroid hormone health, the prevalence of thyroid issues and thyroid statistics, which I think a lot of you guys will find both surprising, and then also it'll be a new piece of information for you because a lot of people aren't aware of just how prevalent thyroid issues are, the role that thyroid hormone plays in body composition and health, signs and symptoms of thyroid issues such as hypothyroidism, what I do when I suspect a client has thyroid issues, and then also the topic of thyroid replacement therapy. So let's start off with the prevalence of thyroid issues and thyroid statistics. So thyroid conditions are a lot more prevalent than most realize. And unless you're a medical practitioner or a coach who has years of coaching under your belt, I don't think most are aware of just how common thyroid issues actually are. According to the American Thyroid Association, which is the world's leading medical association and professional association of medical specialists dedicated to the education and research on how to improve thyroid function as well as thyroid disease. Also, they look into like disease prevention, diagnosis, and treatment, and then improving thyroid patient care. More than 12% of the United States population will develop a thyroid condition in their lifetime. So we're looking at around 1 in every 8 people having thyroid issues at some point in their life. An estimated 20 million Americans have some form of thyroid disease, yet what's really surprising, but is a factual statistic, is that up to 60% of those individuals with thyroid issues are unaware of their condition. So they've either neglected to get it checked, they don't have medical insurance, they have yet to get with a practitioner or a coach who's going to be able to dig deep enough to be able to unveil these issues and really see the lab work for what it is. So we're dealing with something that is quite prevalent, but also commonly overlooked and neglected. So this is also an issue that's far more common in women, and that's something I see in practice, having coached hundreds of women over the years, but it's also something that's been found in research. So for example, women are 5 to 8 times more likely than men to have thyroid problems, and 1 woman in every 8 will develop a thyroid disorder during her lifetime. The thyroid gland is also the most common organ affected by autoimmune disease. And we see that 50 to 80% of hypothyroidism is related to Hashimoto's thyroiditis. And Hashimoto's is essentially a autoimmune disease, which can cause hypothyroidism due to the fact that those with Hashis produce antibodies that attack the thyroid gland and decrease its function and ability to produce or to properly produce thyroid hormone. Now, here's the thing about Hashis. Around 75% of those with Hashis are women. And so this is something that's far more prevalent in the female sex and something that is very common within them. And so we have to be very aware as coaches, especially like for me personally, I work with actually more than half of my roster are women. So this is something I'm very aware of first and foremost. And then I'm also very cognizant when looking at lab work. Now, the causes of thyroid problems are largely unknown. However, what is known is that undiagnosed thyroid disease may put individuals at risk for certain serious conditions, which include things like cardiovascular disease, osteoporosis, and infertility. Most thyroid diseases are lifelong conditions, but luckily they can be managed with medical attention and by using the proper approach to nutrition, supplementation, exercise, stress management, and lifestyle as a whole. Now, there are multiple thyroid-related diseases such as Hashimoto's, hyperthyroidism, Graves', and hypothyroidism, but we're going to focus on hypothyroidism, as this is the thyroid condition I'm most familiar with and have worked with the most clients on trying to improve and manage. So I'm going to stay within my wheelhouse and focus on the condition I have the most real-world experience with, both as a coach and also as someone who has had the condition myself and has been successfully managing it for several years. So hypothyroidism is a condition where the thyroid gland does not produce enough thyroid hormone. So this decreased activity of the gland results in lowered thyroid hormone and some unfavorable side effects such as extreme fatigue, water retention and weight gain, brain fog and forgetfulness, amongst many others that we'll cover later in this podcast. So this is really where the emphasis or the focus of this podcast is going to go. And so we're next going to go over the roles that thyroid hormone plays in body composition and health. And so thyroid hormone plays a massive role in our body composition and health improvement, as literally every cell in our body has a receptor for thyroid. So seeing as there are receptors for thyroid in every cell of the body and all throughout the body, thyroid hormone affects all major organ systems in the body. And this is going to include things like your heart and cardiovascular system, our metabolic system, our brain and central nervous system, our autonomic nervous system, bone, and then the digestive system via the GI tract. So thyroid hormone acts as the master regulator of our metabolism, and due to playing that role, thyroid acts to speed up and upregulate many processes in the body. And this is going to include things like cholesterol clearance, energy use, heart rate, protein turnover, and bone turnover. Thyroid hormone also has a ton of actions which impact our metabolism, our energy expenditure, and body composition. So having proper thyroid function and production allows us to have enough thyroid to govern our metabolic rate and energy expenditure levels, which is the amount of calories that we burn per day, and thus how many calories you can eat and maintain your body weight and body composition on. Thyroid hormone increases fatty acid mobilization from fat cells. So it helps us get stored fat out of a fat cell, which we can then burn off for energy during activity and or exercise. And this is something, that three-step process of mobilizing fat out of a fat cell, transporting it, and burning it for energy is something that I've done a full deep dive on in our fat loss physiology, as well as our stubborn body fat podcast. So if you guys are kind of more interested in maybe the nitty gritty aspects of fat loss and really how we liberate fatty acids and we transport them and we get them into the mitochondria of the cell and burn them off for energy, I would really recommend you guys going back to those. Thyroid also stimulates fat oxidation in skeletal muscle, which helps us burn fat for fuel. It helps fuel mobilization, both in terms of fat and glucose utilization, which increase insulin sensitivity. Thyroid is also involved in protein turnover, which is the relationship between protein synthesis and protein breakdown. Thyroid hormone also helps with glucose utilization. It helps with glucose uptake as it's involved in GLUT4 transporters being translocated to the membrane of the cell. So essentially what that means is without adequate thyroid, especially T3, we're not going to be able to get glucose up regulated and essentially glucose uptake into the actual muscle cell itself. And so that can cause problems with blood glucose levels, as well as nutrient partitioning and insulin sensitivity. Thyroid also increases cholesterol metabolism and clearance so we can maintain healthy blood lipid levels. Thyroid also plays a role in governing or essentially regulating heart rate, and it's involved in bone growth and maturation as well as bone resorption. So overall, thyroid hormone impacts body composition and health as it helps to regulate and maintain your metabolic rate, your body weight regulation, your body temperature regulation, your growth and repair of different tissues, your digestion motility, which essentially is allowing us to have more regular bowel movements, and our appetite. So there's multifaceted and multi-pronged areas that thyroid hormone is impacting, which is why we really want to make sure that our thyroid hormone and production and function is in a good place. Seeing as thyroid hormone plays such an important role in body composition, health, metabolism, and in the function of many bodily processes, there's a lot of signs and symptoms that come along with thyroid issues. When someone has low thyroid output or hypothyroidism, it affects many of the body systems as thyroid interacts with every cell and tissue in the body. So I'm going to go through a list of signs and symptoms that I myself have experienced, and then I've also seen in new clients when they first come to me, which provides me the biofeedback I need to determine if we need to dig in deeper and we really need to look into this area of their hormones even more. So some symptoms of low thyroid include problems regulating your normal body weight due to a lowered metabolic rate and lower energy expenditure levels. So this effect of hypothyroidism can lead to some individuals experiencing weight gain or even trouble losing weight. It can also make it more difficult to maintain your normal body weight at your usual maintenance calorie intake. So this is something that I noticed myself personally, where I was eating. I'm very diligent in terms of calorie tracking and very consistent in terms of my day-to-day practices in terms of the meals I eat. And when I was really dealing with the worst bout of my hypothyroidism, when I had not been medicated yet, I noticed that my body weight was increasing. I was retaining a lot of fluid and water. I had this puffy look to me, and these were all signs and symptoms of hypothyroidism. And eventually, when I got treated, actually, I dissipated a lot of that water weight quite quickly upon starting proper thyroid replacement therapy. You'll also notice that you'll feel abnormally cold, and this is a result of a decrease in body temperature because thyroid plays and interacts with body temperature regulation. So seeing as having low thyroid levels downregulates many processes in the body, it can downregulate digestive function and cause GI issues, including slowed motility, constipation, and a substantial decrease in bowel movements. And then it can also lead to an increased risk of developing SIBO and dysbiosis as you're not moving food through your GI tract as well. So it's kind of just sitting there. Hypothyroid can also lead to issues such as metabolic health issues. So this is going to include things like higher cholesterol levels, because with a downregulated thyroidal axis, you're going to have a decrease in cholesterol clearance. So oftentimes, I've seen, honestly, surprisingly high blood lipid levels in clients who have a downregulated thyroidal axis as their body isn't clearing their cholesterol. So it can result in things such as high LDL, high total cholesterol, and then high triglycerides. Hypothyroidism can also cause impairments in insulin sensitivity, and this can result in high blood sugar levels due to impaired carbohydrate metabolism, impaired GLUT4 translocation at the level of the tissue. So essentially, your muscles aren't uptaking glucose as well. And we know that skeletal muscle is the site for 80%, 80+% of glucose disposal. And you're also going to have a decrease in glucose uptake and utilization, meaning you're not going to be able to metabolize and absorb glucose from the carbohydrates you're eating as well, which will lead to glucose staying elevated in the blood, which is going to show in like you having hyperglycemia essentially. So other symptoms and side effects of hypothyroidism include fluid retention and edema. So that was what I was referring to in terms of the puffiness and the water retention that I was noticing on my own physique and I've noticed on others. Low energy, fatigue, and lethargy. Cognitive issues like a lack of focus and brain fog, and this was a huge one for me. I was in corporate America at the time, managing both large amounts of accounts for a sports nutrition company, but I also was coaching. And I just noticed I wasn't as sharp as I generally am. So my memory retention was off. It was just, honestly, it was not a favorable period of my life. It can result in depression, brittle hair, skin, and nails, irregular periods, and a loss of libido. And so these are all signs and symptoms and side effects of hypothyroidism. So take it from someone who's dealt with many of these personally. This isn't a fun situation to encounter, which is why it's important to be aware of the signs and symptoms of this disease. Although some of these symptoms are common, meaning a lot of people experiencing them, they are not normal. So when I see a client suffering from multiple of these symptoms, I dig in deeper because I want them to realize how great they can look, feel, and function. And I find that so many people are so used to feeling like shit that they've settled. And essentially what's ended up happening is they've settled for this state of being, which shouldn't be the case, which is one of the many reasons I start almost every client I work with in a primer phase, where I specifically tell them that we're going to work on improving their internal physiology and their metabolic health, as a healthy body is a responsive body. And that is something that I've always said as part of my coaching practice. It's kind of my motto that I'm known for, but it's something that I've seen in practice. When you're able to upregulate a lot of these internal processes, these physiological processes, improve someone's metabolism as well as their metabolic health, they feel so much better. They're able to train in such a more intense capacity. So they're getting better body composition results as an outcome of that. And then also, because they have better biofeedback, they're recovering better, all these downstream effects, they have a better quality of life, which really goes far. It's not just about what you can do in the gym and how you feel in the gym, both during training and after training, but also how do you feel the rest of the days? Like if you're in the gym 1 hour a day, how do you feel the other 23 hours of the day? And what I found with a lot of individuals with hormonal issues, they feel like shit most of the day. And they've kind of just gotten used to this state of being. But once they realize and once they see just how good they can feel, they don't want to go back. And it's a beautiful process to be a part of, and something that I think that all people should invest into, because you are your greatest investment. Your health, your fitness, these are things that are going to pay off dividends, like the best investment you could ever think of. They have an incredible ROI in terms of your return on investment for just taking some time, really doing some deep work in terms of looking into health markers and improving your fitness, using body fat if you have excess adiposity, or even just feeding yourself up if you're someone that has these downregulated hormones due to chronic dieting. And these are things that can really go so far within not only your body composition, the way you look, but also the way you feel and function. Next, I want to cover what I do when I suspect a client has thyroid issues. So when I have a client who I know is clearly in a deficit and tracking their intake correctly, they're maintaining their NEAT levels, meaning they're keeping their physical activity levels up and we're tracking them. They're training adequately and intensely, and they're nailing their cardio, yet they're still having difficulty losing body fat. I start to look beneath the surface for signs and symptoms that may indicate that their thyroid health is suboptimal. I see coaching as both a science and an art. So I like to collect a lot of data from my clients, which I assess on a weekly basis. And then I look at my role of a coach almost like a detective, where I'm peeling back the layers of the onion to be able to identify any bottlenecks that may be holding that client from being the best version of themselves, and also areas that we can work on to get them even better results as we move forward. For many of my clients, their number one bottleneck is their approach to nutrition and a lack of stress management skills. But there are so many others that have had hormonal issues that I've been able to rectify, and it's had positive effects on their body composition and also their quality of life. So these are things that cannot be overlooked. Like if you are working with someone that's just a macro coach and they're not looking at blood work, they're not digging in deeper with you, they're not referring you out to other resources, they may, I don't want to put it like they're doing you an injustice, but essentially it's a disservice in terms of nutrition coaching, because it shouldn't just be about macros in terms of the X's and O's of prescribing you calories and macros and sending you on your way. Improving your physique is a multifaceted approach, which takes a multi-pronged and very strategic manner. And so to be able to optimize everything within your life and everything within your body composition, we really have to look at all these, not only low-hanging fruit, but also some of the more complicated and nitty-gritty details of what's going on inside. It can't just be about the external. So some of the signs and symptoms I'm looking for, and also know from experience have been correlated with thyroid issues, is when a client is cold despite it being warm out. So if I have a client who's always needing to wear sweatshirts in the dead of winter, or the dead of summer rather, I usually suspect something's going on. If a client who's having a really difficult ability to lose body fat despite nailing their nutrition, their training, and their physical activity levels, I will look in deeper if I have a client who's experiencing unexplained weight gain despite not increasing their calorie intake or decreasing their activity and energy expenditure levels. If I notice that a client is having all these symptoms and then also they're just giving me feedback that they have excessive fatigue and brain fog, they have GI issues like really bad constipation where they're going to the bathroom substantially less than they have in the past, and if they have dry skin, brittle nails, and hair loss. If a client presents me with a few of these symptoms and I'm able to triangulate a few of these symptoms, I will put together a suggested list of labs I want to have pulled so I can objectively check their lab markers to see if their symptoms are a result of a downregulation in their thyroid production, or overt hypothyroidism. If a client's blood work comes back indicating hypothyroidism or an underactive thyroid, it's usually associated with dysregulations in testosterone production and also a slowing of physical and mental activity, which tends to explain some of the biofeedback that I've been getting from them. And then what we need to do is we need to address this with their doctor and through dietary, supplementation, pharmaceutical, and lifestyle interventions. However, the approach I take with each client is based on their specific labs, what they look like, their actual values, their situation, what they have access to as I work with clients around the world, and also what areas of their biofeedback and body composition are being most heavily impacted by their suboptimal thyroid health. So this is not a one solution fits all type of thing. It's not something that I could just give you over the internet and say, hey, do this, and this, and it's going to fix your thyroid health. Like I have encountered hundreds of issues over the years, and each client is an individual first and foremost. They have a different lifestyle, a different schedule, different stressors, different root causes of these issues. And so it's by case basis. And I understand that a lot of times people look to experts or they look to nutrition professionals like myself, and they want just this one size fits all answer. And that's just not coaching. This is an art. It is a science, but it is an art as well. And it's really getting to know the person, getting to know how their physiology works as well as their psychology. So this is something that it takes a lot of investment from an educational perspective on my end as a coach, but also a time perspective, really getting to know that client and really helping them to the best of my ability in a manner that's going to suit them best. The last topic I'm going to cover on today's podcast is thyroid replacement therapy. I'm a nutritionist first and foremost, so I like to take a food-first approach to rectifying issues before I dive into hormonal therapy with a client. And I found that the most effective approach in practice, because if you think you're just going to throw a hormone in the mix, whether that be testosterone replacement therapy or estradiol replacement or even thyroid replacement, and you think you're just going to throw that into the mix and into a poor lifestyle and feel better and see results, you're sadly mistaken. And it's an unfortunate thing that so many people go through the process of doing. They think that a hormone is just going to rectify everything when they still have all the root causes of their issues are still in place and still within their lifestyle and in their routine and in their schedule. And it's kind of just throwing a band-aid on a bad situation, which isn't going to really rectify this long term. So we first need to build a foundation of proper nutrition, adequate micronutrient intake, proper training and physical activity, sufficient sleep, and stress management. If a client has clinically low thyroid levels when they first contact me and they want to lose weight, we need to first address their thyroid hormone health, as going into a deficit is only going to downregulate thyroid hormone production more. So the first thing I'm going to do is take them at least back to maintenance calories, because I want to get them out of a state of low energy availability and I want to get them out of the deficit, which could be potentially downregulating their thyroid production. I then work on improving hormones through increasing energy availability and also building out a very micronutrient dense diet that has all the necessary cofactors needed for thyroid hormone production and the conversion of T4 to metabolically active T3 production, like iodine, selenium, zinc, iron, and tyrosine. Then I look to modify their training and exercise levels in an effort to decrease both physical and mental stress. So many times this includes reducing or cutting back on HIIT training or excessive amounts of high intensity cardio, and then dialing in their approach to resistance training. I also have had a ton of women who come to me after years of doing activities like CrossFit, who have a downregulated thyroidal axis. I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that it was CrossFit that independently caused that. But when I've had at least a dozen plus women come to me for coaching who were either mothers and or business owners going through perimenopause and doing a ton of Metcons per week at their CrossFit gym, and when I pull their labs, 90% of those women that fit that description have thyroid levels that would be considered as hypothyroidal. I think that that's just more than a coincidence. I'm only going to say this from my personal perspective, but I will tell you that this is something I've seen way more times than I wanted to. And it's just, you have to be aware of the signs and symptoms and the commonalities between clients and realize that sometimes they all, many of these things are common root issues. So it could be the fact that they have very stressful lives. They own businesses or they're mothers with multiple children. They have so many things going on, and then they're thrashing their bodies. So I'm also focusing on improving sleep so that they're getting more sufficient rest and recovery, as my aim is to lower their total allostatic load and to essentially take stress off the system and to remove some of the excess stressors that are filling up their total stress bucket. So if a client comes to me in a different state, which would be if a client comes to me and they're in a state of low energy availability from prolonged bouts of underfueling for their activity level and or from prolonged dieting cycles, such as the many clients who come to me after years or even decades of jumping from one diet to another, we need to work on that first as well. With these individuals, I'll often shift them into a higher energy flux lifestyle, which is something I've done full podcasts on that you guys can look up my name with high flux or high energy flux and really get more of the details about. However, what I'm trying to do with these clients, I know they're very body composition focused. So if I just tell them, hey, I'm going to pull back on all your training and have you eat more, they're so worried about gaining fat, they're not going to buy into the process. So what I do is I transition them into a different type of model where they eat more, yet they maintain a healthy body weight, body fat level, and body composition as I'm now fueling them properly for their activity levels and their training, which can upregulate all metabolic processes, including their basal metabolic rate, their thermic effective feeding because they're eating more, their exercise energy expenditure, and their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And I've also found a benefit from specifically increasing carbohydrate intake to help with leptin signaling, especially for individuals who come to me having run low carb or ketogenic diets for years, which have been shown to lower thyroid production, especially T3 levels in the literature. And this is also what I see when I pull labs from perpetual low carb dieters. This multifaceted approach as a whole helps them feel better and function better, which has downstream benefits on both their physiology and their psychology. Now, if I get another set of labs run after doing this with a client for a period of time and they still have a downregulated thyroidal axis for whatever reason that may be, could it be genetics? Could it be, a lot of times it is a genetic predisposition towards this. It could be due to autoimmune disease like Hashimoto's. I'll suggest they go to an endo or hormone replacement doctor to get prescribed thyroid replacement therapy. Now, when it comes to thyroid replacement therapy, the conventional medicine model is T4 monotherapy, which means using T4 medication on its own. So exogenous T4 replacement can help with getting TSH into a normal range. This is because T4 monotherapy will provide more of a substrate to allow for more T4 to be in the system, which can then convert to T3, which is the metabolically active form of thyroid, which runs many of our metabolic processes. However, replacing T4 doesn't always increase the amount of T3 our tissues receive, even if it does bring down TSH, which is why I believe we should be checking more thyroid markers than just TSH, which is a pituitary marker, which just shows us how much of a signal is being sent to the thyroid gland, but doesn't show us how much T4 and T3 the thyroid gland is producing, and the tissues are actually receiving, which is really what's important. So this is why I really specifically like to pull both free T4 and free T3 to see how much unbound thyroid hormone this client has. There's also another option in terms of thyroid replacement therapy, which is dual therapy, which is T4 in combination with T3 in replacement doses, which may be more favorable from a symptom resolution perspective. And nowadays, I'm seeing a lot more use of both T4 and T3 replacement therapy, which a lot of people feel better subjectively when doing. And I can attest to this personally, as this is what I use now. But initially, I was put on just T4 monotherapy, and it did improve my labs from an objective standpoint. Like TSH came down, my T4 levels went up, but it only partially resolved my symptoms. So I still had I had similar symptomology that I had previously before I even took medication. Now, when it comes to thyroid replacement doses, we need to keep in mind that we naturally produce around 100 micrograms of T4 and 29 micrograms of T3 endogenously, meaning naturally. So it would make sense to replace these amounts. And so, as someone with hypothyroidism who has suffered with many of the symptoms of low thyroid issues that I discussed today, I can tell you that going on thyroid replacement therapy substantially improved my quality of life. And that's why I'm covering this topic today. And so, guys, yet again, thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Chasing Clarity podcast. If you need anything from me, whether that be one-on-one coaching, I will be opening up my roster again. This episode will be going out right in the middle of August, but at this point, I know that I will be opening up my roster by that point. And so, if you guys have any interest in one-on-one coaching, you really want to get to the next level, you want someone to help you with your body composition, your physique, your health progression, and really improving how you look, you feel, and you function, and getting all those things on a higher level, a higher capacity, please reach out to me. And the best way to do so is through my email, which is bdecruzfitness@gmail.com. You guys can also find me on Instagram, which is @BrandonDeCruz_. And if you guys ever have an interest in listening, I do a lot of other educational podcasts in terms of being a guest. And so just this summer, I've already been on, I want to say, between 8 and 10 guest appearances on different podcasts. So if you guys type into Spotify or iTunes, Brandon DeCruz, BrandonDacruz, and just search me, especially in Spotify, you guys will find literally hundreds of podcast appearances that I made. And I would love your feedback on this show as well as the other appearances that I made. As always, guys, please remember to follow the show both on Spotify and iTunes and make sure you're subscribed. I would love you guys to leave us a review on either platform, or just even if you just want to give us 5 stars, that'd be preferred. And that's super quick and easy to do. And then also, please be sure to, if you enjoyed this episode, if you got anything from it, if this is a topic that you want to hear more about, or there's other topics, you can literally just take a screenshot or just share it on your stories, so we can continue to reach more listeners, so we can get this feedback from you, and we can continue to make this show better and better. As always, guys, enjoy the rest of your week, and thank you for tuning in. Peace.